Hello, and welcome back to Measuring Learner Data and Assessment. This is Week 1, Lecture 3, The Importance of Assessment in the Gathering of Data. As covered previously, there are many types of data that can be gathered from assessment, and many types of assessment that can be utilized. The purpose of this lecture is to approach assessment from a higher point of view by asking the question, why is assessment important, and to what extent does it impact different stakeholders? Our stakeholders. First, students. The population that is probably most impacted directly by assessment. Since the introduction of No Child Left Behind in 2001, we have seen an entire generation of students that focus solely on the importance of assessment. All that matters to them is the test. Assessments are used to determine their placement, their program, their progress, and their procession. As such, it is hard to overstate the importance of assessment in the lives of our students. But how has this impacted the classroom? Students seem only focused on the test, and this has come at the expense of focus on other learning activities. And the teacher is stakeholder. Assessment has always been an integral part of teaching. Why? Well, we want to make sure that what we're doing is sticking. Assessment tells us if we've achieved our goals for the day, week, unit, or year. It allows us to reflect on our practice and make decisions as we move forward. Over the last couple of decades, though, we've seen an increase in the amount and frequency of assessment at all levels of education. This has, in a lot of cases, begun to limit, to one extent or another, the amount of time spent in class or lessons on skills and content not focused on some assessment. The administration is a stakeholder. On a school-wide level, administration traditionally approached assessment in much the same way that teachers approach it, as an answer to the question, are the students learning? As assessment began to impact schools legally, students with disabilities being provided with the legal protection afforded by an IEP, admin began to have to be more reactive. Since the passage of educational policy that instituted high-stakes testing and the connection of funding to assessment, administrators have been placed in a position where test scores don't just reflect the learning or levels of a student. They impact the ability of these administrators to make decisions that impact the present or future of their schools and students. And the family as stakeholders. Again, assessment used to be a simple reflection of how your student was doing in a particular class. As your student got older, the weight of certain assessments became a bit more important, like the SATs or ACTs. With the change in climate that has taken place over the last few decades, assessment's importance to families has increased. Similar to the importance for students themselves, families will see that assessment data is used to determine placement, program, progress, and procession. The difference here is that as stakeholders who are outside of the day-to-day grind of schooling and education, family members tend to have a different perspective. These perspectives can be impacted by a number of factors, including education regarding the assessment, cultural bias, age, and region. Assessing assessment and acting on data. So how do we know what assessment is the right one for a student or situation? Well, in general, we are asked to trust that assessments we are giving that have been handed down to us are appropriate for our populations. I would contend that this simple acceptance is not something that should be automatic. Take the time to vet assessments. But how? I would suggest creating a rubric. Simple questions that can be answered for each assessment in a direct way would include, what are we trying to find out? What tools are being used? And what are the results? So once we have that, how can we act on data? How can we use data to inform our decisions? Each answer that you find to the above questions should correlate to the other questions. To give a concrete example, if the tools that are being used fall in line more with a diagnostic test, but are being used as part of a summative assessment, then action needs to be taken. The biggest, and I would argue most important, answer or connection relationship is whether or not the results are actually reflecting what the original purpose of the assessment was. Classroom teachers do a lot of this as part of their practice as it is. Using data to drive decision making is at the heart of being an educator, and we will usually very quickly realize that a certain assessment is inappropriate. It is important that we utilize this reflective skill with larger assessments as well, though, and share our results with those that it can affect change, if needs be. Assessment and the measuring of learner data is something that we as educators tend to think about on some level on a daily basis. It is important to remember that these issues do not only impact us, however. There are multiple stakeholders that are impacted by the choices we make surrounding the collection of data and assessment. It is important that we take the opportunities offered to us to become well-informed and act decisively in the interest of all involved parties, so that the data we gather is useful and valuable to all.